The most comfortable chair in the world was there, the sharpest pin, the warmest blanket, the loudest drum, the stickiest glue, the most interesting diamond, the most interesting the most interesting book, the funniest joke, the biggest diamond, and the most lifelike stuffed cat, the prettiest lampshade, and 1,000 things more to rename his collection, to move things about, to do things with him, was the greatest joy of the master thief. Seated in the most comfortable chair in the world, fingertips, er, finger, fingertips pressed together, he spent hours enjoying his treasures and wondering if there was nothing lacking to him under the sun. Presently he heard by chance of the opal baby carriage of the invisible baby, the immediately he resolved to add his new wonder to his gallery. He went first to his secret den, turned a glass globe, spoke 5 words into it, and sealed them inside. Then he dressed in a two-colored suit, pocketed the glass globe, and fled onto his long legs over hill and dale to the royal city. When he arrived in the afternoon, he easily made his way into the gardens. It was a beautiful day, and the opal baby carriage stood unattended in the shade of a group of ancient trees. Several nurses stood around the silver fence that enclosed the prince's play place. And now, creeping unnoticed closer, the master thief took the ball out of his pocket and threw it towards the group. The ball hit the ground and shattered, and the words the sly master thief had sealed inside it escaped into the air, and these words were, "Oh, look at the balloon." Immediately, all the nurses looked up at the sky to see the imaginary balloon, and while they looked up around, the master thief jumped towards the opal baby carriage, released the brake on the golden wheels, and pushed the carriage in front of him, running wildly through the flower-lined alleys and garden towards the main road. In a long straight line, the master thief fled while pushing the baby carriage the entire time. Soon, the city bells began to ring loudly. Soldiers Soldiers were spent out on the roads and horses were sent galloping after him. But all the no but all to no avail, the jewel encrusted carriage sped like a meteor across the land. The last thing the last thing they saw of it was a moving streak of a light along the steep slope of a mountain, a light that glowed like a great star for a moment at the top and then quickly sank out of sight. When the master thief reached his secret refuge in the valley, he shouted triumphantly, and quickly rode to the berry car- When the master thief reached his secret refuge in the valley, he shouted triumphantly, and quickly rode the baby carriage to the museum, the most magnificent, the most magnificent, the most magnificent baby carriage in the world. The master thief once again, producing the most comfortable chair, sank into it and thought about his latest prize. Suddenly a strange sound, half weeping, half gurgling, made him sit up. Had someone discovered him secret treasure trove? What could it mean? And now a second cry came, ending in a long protesting wail. The master thief had stolen the invisible baby along the carriage. The idea of the idea of having to care for a baby, any baby, troubled the master thief. But as for but as for an in, but as for an invisible baby, that was indeed a trial. But suddenly the master thief slapped his knee and grinned with joy. He had thought of the spell dispeller. The robber held up the brightest lantern in the world and went to the small side cave where he had placed the talisman. His heart skipped a beat. The spell dispeller was gone. Bewildered, the master thief began searching the small cave but could find no sign in this. Bewildered, the master thief began searching the small cave but could not find. Bewildered, the master thief began searching the small cave but could not find sign of the spell dispeller. Eventually, Eventually, he gave up the search and carried the prince back to his dwelling. And so, days and months and even years passed without the spell dispeller coming to light. From an invisible baby, the prince grew into an invisible boy, whose cheerful voice and kind presence filled the master thief's house. As it turned out, being invisible was not so bad after all. You could see things and find things that were hidden from all the mortals. You could climb to the side of a bird's nest, sit quietly, and watch the mother bird feed her young. You could dive unseen into the clear, cold pools of the mountain, streams a snap and snap at the lurking trout with their bobbing tails. You could follow the squirrel on his secret granary. When the prince was 15, it happened that the master thief suddenly became ashamed of his bad manners. So ashamed that he'd not only decided to give up further collecting, but also to return everything he had stolen. The invisible prince could help the master thief greatly with his task. People in all kingdoms of the world began to find their stolen possessions, waiting for them when they came. People in the kingdoms of world began to find store. People in all kingdoms of the world began to find their stolen possessions, waiting for them when they came to breakfast in the morning. The teddy cat became once again the pride of the Blue Tower. The most interesting book went out to its place on the shelves of the royal library. The golden scroll of the funniest joke appeared as if by magic on the wall of the king's room. At the end of the fifth year, the opal baby carriage and the invisible prince were the only two stolen things left to return. The invisible prince was now 20 years old, with a heavy heart, for the boy was as dear to him as a son. The remorseful master thief began to prepare to return the prince and carriage to unhappy parents. On the morning of departure, the master thief descended for the last time to the abandoned museum and walked through the dusty corridors, leaving footprints in the dust and musing on the gloria that had been here. On the morning of departure, the master thief descended for the last time to the abandoned museum and walked through the dusty corridors, leaving footprints in the dust and musing the glory had been leaving footprints in the dust and musing the glory that had been. There had stood the shiny rubber. Here had stood the shiny rubber plant. Here the most beautiful coat rack. Here the only razor that never rubbed a hole in the paper. A tear gathered in his eye. He had loved them. He had stolen them. He had restored them. He was free. Suddenly his gaze, which was wandering through empty shelves, fell on a small box wedged in a gloomy corner. With a loud cry of joy, the master thief recognized the spell remover. It had fallen behind a shelf. It had been hidden there for almost 20 years. The master thief put it in his pocket and jumped up the stairs. After a pleasant journey, the master thief and invisible prince reached the city and took lodging on it. After a pleasant journey, the master thief and the invisible prince reached the city and took lodging at an inn. An invisible prince, I must remind you, was still invisible. The master thief and the invisible prince took a walk through the royal city. To the surprise of travelers, they found the city full of decorations. Strangers still, despite the festivity, and citizen of the royal city seemed particularly moody. "Good host," said the master thief to the innkeeper, "what does this jubilation mean? Are you celebrating some royal event?" "A festival, yes," answered the host, looking around to see if anyone was listening. "It's a festival, but only in name. Haven't you heard the news? Let's step aside a bit, and I'll tell you the story. 3 years ago, our King Valdora IV, tired of the worries of the state and still deeply struck in his heart by the loss of his son, the invisible prince of whom you might have heard, handed over the reign of the kingdom of the Marquis Malicorn. Last week, this official seize of the royal power put our beloved king and queen in a dark tower and proclaimed himself heir to the throne. The coronation takes place tomorrow." Afternoon in the great hall of the royal palace. Oh, if only the invisible prince would return. The master thief nodded while his busy brain was planning all the time. Suddenly he smiled. He had come up with a plan. Just like 20 years ago, everyone says everyone was just like 20 years ago, everyone was just like 20 years ago, everyone was in the great hall in the castle. The nobility, packed up as tightly as 20 years ago, were waiting silently for the arrival of the new king and his procession. The portals were opened, revealing Malicorn and his followers. Everyone remained silent. The wicked Marquis walked the wicked Marquis walked to the podium and the coronation chair. The sound of the bells and cannon stopped. An official came forward with a robe. An official came forward with An official came forward with a no- An official came forward with a royal robe, just as he was about to throw it over the waiting shoulders of a marquis. Something invisible snatched the robe away from him and disappeared into the air. Extraordinarily angry, but also worried, With ex- Malicorn hoped for more luck with the scepter, but this was too seized by the invisible hand. As for the royal crown, it disappeared in an instant from its purple cushion. Malicorn, still standing in shock, looked up and saw looked up and saw the newly crowned king. His face is a mixture of anger and disbelief. The rest of the aristocracy, the rest of the aristocracy, the rest of the aristocracy shouted and jeered, and in the midst of the uproar, the master thief emerged from behind the curtains, pushed the Malicorn aside with a pushed Malicorn aside with a sweep of his long arms, and addressed the crowd. People, you have come to see your king. Your rightful king is here. Do you want to see him? Yes, everyone shouted. And then the master thief touched the invisible prince with a charm remover. At the moment, a flash of light made everyone blink. Fair music was heard, and suddenly the invisible prince appeared visible before the throne. He was tall, dark haired, with brown eyes and slight build, and the crown was on his head, the cloak on his shoulders, and the scepter in his hand. Now the bells and the cannon really began to ring, and a cheerful breeze flew into the toss of the flags. And a cheerful breeze blew into toss the flags and banners that had hung so still in the air. Blew into the toss on flags, blew it in toss the flags and banners that had hung so still in the air. The soldiers all threw their hats into the air and cheered wildly, while the organist was so happy that he began to play two tunes at once. Everyone was laughing and shouting hooray. As for the wicked Marquis, he tumbled out his back door. He tumbled out the back door as fast as his legs could carry him, and no one ever saw him again. The old king and queen, released from the dark tower, quickly came inside and greeted their son. He looks like you, my dearest, the king whispered to the queen. The master thief was forgiven everything. The master thief was forgiven everything. Singing and cheering, the people of city poured out their homes in the sunny streets. Clang, clink, boom, clang, clink, boom, boom, boom. And they lived happily ever after. So that's all for today. Thank you all for listening and watching. Bye bye!